Hello, welcome to Chapter 5, the lipids, including triglycerides, phospholipids, and sterols. These are your learning objectives for this chapter. So lipids or fats. So we have three types of fats we'll talk about: triglycerides, phospholipids, and sterols. Characteristics include that they are essential nutrients, they are found in both plants and animals, they are insoluble in water, contain one or more fatty acid, and provide 9 calories per gram. They have many more carbons and hydrogens in proportion to oxygen, therefore supply more calories per gram than carbohydrates and protein. A chemist's view of fatty acids and triglycerides. So what do they see when they look at it? A triglyceride contains one glycerol molecule and 3 fatty acids. Triglycerides is the chief form of fat in diet, and it's the major storage form of fat in the body. Fatty acids have an even number of carbons in their chain. Fatty acids can be saturated or unsaturated. Saturated fatty acids are saturated with hydrogen, meaning it carries the maximum number of hydrogen molecules. Unsaturated fatty acids have at least one double bond and therefore are not saturated with hydrogen. Can be monounsaturated or polyunsaturated. Omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, both are essential fatty acids that the body cannot make. Some of the functions include helping to regulate blood pressure as well as blood clotting. Omega-3 is also known as linolenic acid, and omega-6 is also known as linoleic acid. One gram of fat contains how many calories? D. The answer is 9 calories per gram. Saturated fatty acids. C. Are fully loaded with hydrogens. This slide contains 3 questions, so I encourage you to pause the presentation momentarily and see if you can answer these on your own. Having too much or too little fat can lead to poor health. Fatty acids contain an even number of carbons. And 3, triglycerides consist of a glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Again, I encourage you to pause this presentation momentarily and see if you can answer yourself. So starting with the left column, A, saturated fat matches with 2, which is B, all carbons are linked to hydrogens only, and C, contains no double bond. B, unsaturated fat matches with A, has 1 double bond. And C, polyunsaturated fat matches with D, more than 1 double bond present. So this is a slide here that contains a chart for you to be able to reference, specifically looking at saturation in common food sources. You might find that to be helpful. So stearic acid is considered a saturated fat, and that's found mostly in animal fats. And then oleic acid is a monounsaturated fat, and some examples are olive and canola oils. You have linoleic acid, which is polyunsaturated, and examples are sunflower, safflower, corn, and soybean oils. And then the linolenic acid, also polyunsaturated soybean and canola oils, as well as flaxseed and walnuts. So this is a visual of what the fats we just looked at in the previous slide look like. First one being stearic acid. And if you note, there are no double bonds between the carbons. It is totally saturated with hydrogen atoms. The second one, the middle example, is oleic acid, and that is a monounsaturated fat because it has only one double bond. And if you look in the middle, you can see between the two carbons, that double line, it almost looks like an equal sign, that signifies a double bond. So you can see that there's only one double bond in the oleic acid. The last one, third at the bottom, is linoleic acid, which is omega-6, and it's polyunsaturated because it has more than one double bond. And you can see in the middle and slightly to the left, they have the two areas that have that double bond, and that is what makes it a polyunsaturated fat. I also want to point out on the left of each of these, that's highlighted in green, is known as the methyl group. So that's that carbon and 3 hydrogens on the end, again highlighted in green on the left. Chemists identify polyunsaturated fats by the position of the double bond closest to the methyl group, the carbon and 3 hydrogens, and that's described as an omega number. So again, looking at that bottom example, if you count inward from left to the first double bond, that's how they get the omega-6. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That sixth bond, that's how they name it. And so that one is the omega-6. Bonds in the fatty acid chain. So fatty acids differ in the length of chain, or the number of carbons, the degree of saturation, and the location of double bonds. Polyunsaturated fats are identified by the position of the double bond closest to the methyl group, meaning a polyunsaturated fatty acid with its closest double bond 3 carbons away from the methyl group is an omega-3. If it's 6 carbons away, it's an omega-6. Monounsaturated fatty acids are considered omega-9 groups because their only double bond is 9 carbons away from the methyl group. I encourage you to pause this presentation momentarily and see if you can answer yourself. So the first picture on the left, A, that matches with both B and D. B being linoleic acid and D the omega-6. B, the middle picture on the left, matches with A, linolenic acid, as well as E, which is omega-3. And then the last picture, C, also matches with C, triglyceride. Unsaturated fats are called such because C, they have a double bond. When counting carbons to locate the double bond, you start at which end? The methyl group. So to make a triglyceride, 3 fatty acids attach to a glycerol molecule in a condensation reaction. Remember, condensation reactions bring molecules together and release water. If you look at the slide on the left, the first picture, you see the glycerol molecule on the far left, and then there's three fatty acids that are coming together. So once they come together, they attach, you see the two hydrogens and the oxygen, they come together and they release water. And then once they're connected, it becomes a triglyceride and three water molecules. Fat firmness. The degree of saturation versus unsaturation affects fat firmness and stability. Saturated fats are solid at room temperature. So you can remember that because the S in saturated, S in solid. So saturated fats are solid at room temperature. Unsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature. You can see the examples listed below. Diagram of saturated and unsaturated fatty acids compared. So on the left, we have a saturated fat that tends to stack nicely and consequently tends to be more firm or solid at room temperature. On the right is a mixture of saturated and unsaturated fatty acids, which do not stack neatly because unsaturated fat bends at their double bonds. Because of the bends, they do not stack neatly and therefore tend to be liquid or less firm at room temperature. So here is a good visual of the different types of fat content in foods and oils. Which fatty acids tend to be solid at room temperature? Saturated. Stability. Oxidation. The process of a substance combining with oxygen. This causes spoilage, rancid taste and smell. Polyunsaturated fatty acids spoil quickest because of their double bonds are unstable. Monounsaturated fatty acids are less susceptible, and they're less susceptible because they have less double bonds. Saturated fats are most resistant to oxidation, therefore they are the least likely to become rancid. Basically, the degree of saturation influences stability. Hydrogenation means some or all points of unsaturation become saturated by adding hydrogen molecules. Benefits include protecting against oxidation, therefore prolonging shelf life, and it alters texture by making liquid vegetable oils more solid. Hydrogenation makes margarine spreadable, pie crusts flaky, and puddings creamy. If you look at the bottom picture, you can see hydrogenation taking place. On the left, you have a polyunsaturated fatty acid with two double bonds. And then after, we see hydrogen atoms are attached and the double bonds are gone. In nature, most double bonds are cis, meaning the hydrogens next to the double bonds are on the same side of the carbon chain. In trans fatty acids, the hydrogens next to the double bonds are on opposite sides of the carbon chain. Trans fatty acids, so they are changed from cis to trans configuration and act like saturated fats in the body. Few natural sources of trans fat exist. Some can be found in milk and meat products. May increase blood cholesterol and therefore the risk of heart disease. You want to check food labels for hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated terms. On the left, you have cis. Hydrogens are on the same side of the double bond. On the right side, you have a trans fatty acid, and hydrogens are on the opposite sides of the double bonds. Trans molecules are more linear. Phospholipids. They're similar to triglycerides, but they replace one fatty acid with a phosphate group and choline. Phospholipids are solid and are soluble in fat because fatty acids are hydrophobic, and they are soluble in water because the phosphate group is hydrophilic. Therefore, they work as an excellent emulsifier. For example, you may find them in mayonnaise, salad dressings, candy bars, things like that. Lecithin is the most common and best known phospholipid. Food sources include eggs, liver, soybeans, wheat germ, and peanuts. Roles of phospholipids: they serve as part of cell membranes, and they work as emulsifier to help keep fats suspended in blood and bodily fluids. They also help fat-soluble vitamins and hormones pass in and out of cells. Emulsifier has both water-soluble and fat-soluble portions that promote mixing of oils and fats in watery solutions. Structure of a phospholipid. You can see on the far left is the glycerol molecule. Then you have two fatty acids at the top and middle spots, and the third site is a phosphate group and a molecule of choline. Moving on to sterols. Sterols are lipid compounds with multiple ring structure and side chains, made by the body and found in foods. Most well known is cholesterol. Foods derived from both plant and animals contain sterols. Only animals provide significant amounts of cholesterol, but you can find them in plant products. Some examples of significant sources of cholesterol include meats, eggs, seafood, poultry, and dairy products. Roles of sterols. They are the starting material for bile acids, sex hormones, adrenal hormones, vitamin D, and cholesterol itself. The liver synthesizes about 800 to 1500 milligrams of cholesterol per day, and this is endogenous because the body is creating it itself. The liver uses carbohydrates, protein, and fat fragments to produce this cholesterol. Cholesterol is harmful when it builds up in artery walls and contributes to the buildup of plaque. Plaque buildup leads to atherosclerosis, a disease that causes heart attacks and strokes. Notice how cholesterol is structurally different from triglycerides or phospholipids. Cholesterol has more of a ring structure versus a glycerol and three chains. Here we see how vitamin D is similar structure to cholesterol because it's actually derived from cholesterol. The main difference is that cholesterol has a closed ring, and you can see it in the top picture. That little red line is how it closes off there. I ask that you please pause the presentation momentarily and see if you can match these up. I apologize, we got cut off on the last slide. So we were matching phospholipids, lecithin, and sterols. So I can't go back and show you that slide, but I'm going to verbally tell you what those answers were. So A on the left-hand column was sterol, and that matches with 3, which were A, cholesterol, D, vitamin D, and F, structural component in cell membranes. And then B was the second one on the left-hand column, and that also matched with 3 options, which were B, lecithin, C, soluble in fat and water, and E, form cell membranes. So I apologize for the previous slide. Now addressing this slide, so fat digestion in the GI tract. So we've talked about how digestion starts in the mouth. We have lingual lipase from salivary glands, and that has a minor role in fat digestion for adults. We have muscle contractions of the stomach, which makes some larger fat molecules into smaller droplets. That helps expose them to gastric lipase, but we still have minimal fat digestion in our stomach. Once in the small intestine, fat triggers the release of cholecystokinin, which tells the gallbladder to release bile. Bile is an emulsifier. Then pancreatic lipase is released into the small intestine, where most digestion and absorption of fat occurs. Lipid digestion. So the goal of fat digestion is to dismantle triglycerides into smaller parts that the body can absorb and use. Fats are hydrophobic. They do not mix with water. Digestive enzymes are hydrophilic, meaning water-loving or attracted to water. Bile from the liver allows for emulsification of fats. Enzymes are then able to break down fats to monoglycerides and fatty acids. The beginning of fat digestion. In the mouth, lingual lipase plays a role in fat digestion in infants. It's more relevant for infants due to the short and medium chain triglycerides in milk, specifically breast milk. As for the stomach, you have muscle contractions that mix chyme with digestive enzymes, and it turns fat into smaller droplets. Gastric lipase works a little bit, but not much fat digestion occurs in the stomach. So just to reiterate, in your mouth you have lingual lipase, plays a very small role in adult, but it's more relevant for infants. And then again in the stomach, not a whole lot of fat digestion and absorption is occurring. However, when fat enters the small intestine, it triggers the release of cholecystokinin, which tells the gallbladder to release bile. Bile then is working as an emulsifier by allowing fat to mix with watery fluids because it has both fat and water-soluble properties. Pancreatic lipase is the major fat digesting enzyme. Most hydrolysis and breakdown of triglycerides and phospholipids occurs in your small intestine. Enzymes remove fatty acids from glycerol. That's how triglycerides and phospholipids are broken down. So the major area of digestion and absorption of your fat is occurring in your small intestine. But what happens to bile? So it can either be reabsorbed by the small intestine and recycled, or it can be trapped by fibers in the large intestine and excreted, which can help lower blood cholesterol. This is an imagery of emulsification of fat by bile. I'll let you take a look at this. You can read the description below. This image is also in your text as well. It basically just goes through the process of how bile helps allow for the mixing of fat in a watery solution, and it allows the enzymes to work on the fat. Hydrolysis of a triglyceride. Bonds break and water completes the structure of two fatty acids. Glycerol and short or medium chain fatty acids can pass through intestinal cells and into the bloodstream. Lipid absorption. Glycerol and short and medium chain fatty acids easily diffuse into intestinal cells. They are absorbed directly into the bloodstream. Monoglycerides and long-chain fatty acids are emulsified by bile to form micelles. Micelles are spherical complexes of emulsified fat products from lipid digestion. Micelles diffuse into intestinal cells. Monoglycerides and long-chain fatty acids are reassembled into new triglycerides. Within the intestinal cells, the new triglycerides, cholesterol, and phospholipids are assembled into chylomicrons, released to the lymphatic system, then to bloodstream. Fats are carried through body for immediate use or storage. A chylomicron is a cluster of lipids and protein used as a transport vehicle for fats. Absorption of fat. So this is just imagery of fat absorption. This also is found in your text as well, and it describes how glycerol and small fat molecules move into the bloodstream directly, while large lipids form micelles, which make them water soluble. They then can diffuse into the cells, which are absorbed directly into the bloodstream. Answer is C. Glycerol, short and medium chain fatty acids. Now we will introduce lipoproteins. There are 4 types of lipoproteins that transport lipids. The 4 types include chylomicron, VLDL, LDL, and HDL. A typical lipoprotein contains triglycerides and cholesterol inside and a phospholipid outer layer. Lipid transport is made possible by lipoproteins. Lipoproteins are composed of triglycerides, cholesterol, phospholipid, and protein. Starting with chylomicrons. They are the largest of the lipoproteins, but are the least dense. About 82% is triglycerides, and less than 5% is protein. Function: transport diet-derived fats from the intestine to the bloodstream. They get smaller as triglyceride portion is removed by the cells. Remnants of protein, cholesterol, and phospholipids are then removed by the liver. So cells throughout the body remove triglycerides from the chylomicrons as they pass by, making them smaller. Liver will remove the remnants of protein, cholesterol, and phospholipids. VLDL, or very low density lipoproteins. The liver is the most active site of lipid synthesis, meaning its cells are making cholesterol, fatty acids, and other lipid compounds. VLDL is made up of these lipids made by the liver plus the chylomicron remnants. It's about 50% triglyceride and about 10% protein. Function is to transport lipids from the liver, deliver to cells and tissues. They get smaller and more dense as triglyceride portion is removed by cells. VLDL becomes LDL, or low density lipoprotein. LDL, or low density lipoproteins, they are also sometimes known as the quote unquote bad cholesterol. About 50% cholesterol, 20% protein, composed primarily of cholesterol. As for its function, as LDLs circulate, the body cells take up cholesterol, triglycerides, and phospholipids to use for energy, make hormones or other compounds, or build new membranes. LDL receptors are present on liver cells, which help remove LDLs from circulation, help control blood levels. It is associated with increased risk of heart disease. HDL, or high-density lipoproteins, about 50% protein, 20% cholesterol, composed primarily of protein. Its function is to carry cholesterol from cells back to liver for recycling or disposal. It reduces the risk of heart disease and therefore is known as the quote-unquote good cholesterol. Has anti-inflammatory properties that interfere with plaque from breaking apart and causing heart attacks. Please pause this presentation momentarily. I ask that you see if you can match these up appropriately. As a hint, on the left side, see the low density lipoproteins. That one matches with 2, the others match with 1. So A, chylomicrons match with C, contain the highest amount of triglyceride and are therefore the least dense. B, very low density lipoproteins matches with A, made in the liver, then shrink in the bloodstream as cells take up triglycerides. C, LDL or low density lipoprotein matches with B, higher in cholesterol, lower in triglycerides, taken up by cells after binding to receptors, as well as E, high levels of this lipoprotein have negative health implications. And lastly, D, high density lipoproteins or HDL matches with D, carry cholesterol back to the liver for recycling or excretion. Health implications. Factors that lower LDL and raise HDL. Weight control, replacing saturated fat with monounsaturated fat and polyunsaturated fat in the diet, soluble fibers, phytochemicals, flavonoids may reduce oxidation of LDL cholesterol, minimize inflammation, and reduce blood platelet stickiness. Phytochemicals are biologically active compound in plant foods, and flavonoids are a type of phytochemical. Moderate alcohol consumption and physical activity. LDL cholesterol is most directly linked to heart disease and therefore is known as the bad cholesterol, and HDL cholesterol is known as the good cholesterol. Role of triglycerides: to provide cells with energy. If you recall, fat provides 9 calories per gram. Adipose tissues stores body fat, and we have a virtually unlimited ability to store fat. And this secretes hormones known as adipokines. Adipokines help regulate energy balance and influence several body functions. Other uses of fat in the body: you have skin insulation, so to help maintain body temperature, shock absorption, they cushion and protect your organs, cell membrane material, as well as cell signaling pathways. Essential fatty acids must be supplied by the diet. So you have linoleic or omega-6 and linolenic omega-3. So omega-3 and omega-6 must be supplied by the diet and are therefore essential fatty acids. They can be used to make other fatty acids. Food sources include vegetable oils, seeds, nuts, fish, and seafood. Linoleic acid or omega-6 fatty acid, again, is an essential fatty acid, and it can make other omega-6 fatty acids through desaturation and elongation. It's considered an omega-6, but it's not linoleic acid. Sources include vegetable oils and meats. Linolenic acid or omega-3 fatty acid, also an essential fatty acid and must be supplied by the food. Linolenic acid can make small amounts of DHA and EPA. DHA and EPA play a critical role in the eyes and brain, so vision and cognitive development. It's also important in the prevention and treatment of heart disease. Excuse me, I'm sorry about that. Lipid profile. So this is a desirable blood lipid profile. You may see different ranges at different hospitals, different facilities, but generally this is pretty close to the guidelines. So total cholesterol, you want to be less than 200 milligrams per deciliter, LDL cholesterol to be less than 100 milligrams per deciliter, and HDL cholesterol to be greater than or equal to 60 milligrams per deciliter, and triglycerides less than 100 milligrams per deciliter. Health effects of saturated fats, trans fats, and cholesterol. When it comes to fat intake, you want to focus on both the quality of fats you're consuming as well as the quantity. You want to include monounsaturated fatty acids and polyunsaturated fatty acids and limit your trans and saturated fat intake. Risks from saturated fats. Heart disease is associated with saturated fat intake. Elevated LDL cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease. Saturated fats increase LDL cholesterol, which promote blood clotting, accumulates in the arteries, restricts blood flow, and increases blood pressure. Therefore, high saturated fat intake can increase your LDL cholesterol, which may increase your risk for heart disease. Saturated fat food sources include whole milk, cream, butter, cheese, coconut, palm, and kernel oils. Trans fats increases your LDL and lowers your HDL cholesterol, which increases your risk for heart disease. Risks from trans fats. Trans fatty acids in the diet increase LDL cholesterol and decrease HDL cholesterol. Food sources include those cooked using vegetable shortening, especially cakes, cookies, donuts, pastry, crackers, snack chips, and margarine. Check your labels carefully. You want to watch for hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated terms. Risks from dietary cholesterol. Dietary cholesterol has less effect on blood cholesterol than saturated and trans fat. Food sources of cholesterol include egg yolks, milk products, meat, poultry, and shellfish. Fat links to cancer and obesity. For cancer, dietary fat and the risk of cancer differs for various types of cancer and differs based on the combination and types of fat. So there's mixed results on studies, some evidence is weak and inconclusive. Omega-3s may have a protective role against cancer. Obesity, high fat intake may cause excess calorie consumption. Excess calories can potentially lead to weight gain. So simply put, too many calories, regardless of the source, can lead to obesity. Recommended intakes of saturated fat, trans fat, and cholesterol. DRI and dietary guidelines. 20 to 35% of daily energy from fat. You want less than 10% from saturated fat and as little trans fat as possible. It's hard to determine or set an exact amount of saturated or trans fat that harms health. They no longer limit to less than 300 milligrams of cholesterol. Instead, they encourage people to eat as little cholesterol as possible while following a healthy eating pattern. You want to avoid getting too little fat. Too little fat could mean not getting enough calories or missing out on essential fatty acids as well as vitamins and minerals. Recommendation is to have 1 teaspoon of fat at meals. Recommended intakes of mono and polyunsaturated fats. Monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids may be beneficial to health, so you want to focus on the quality of the fat you consume. You can try to replace saturated and trans fats with monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids. The DRI for linoleic acid, which is omega-6, is 5 to 10% of daily energy, and linolenic acid, which is omega-3, 0.6 to 1.2% of daily energy. There is no DRI for EPA and DHA. As previously mentioned, replacing saturated fat and trans fat with monounsaturated fat and polyunsaturated fat is an effective dietary strategy in preventing heart disease. Type of fat may be more important than the amount of fat. Food sources of monounsaturated fat include olive, canola, and peanut oil, nuts, seeds, and avocados. Food sources of polyunsaturated fat include vegetable oils, safflower, sesame, soy, corn, and sunflower, as well as nuts and seeds. Replacing saturated fat with unsaturated fat. So portion sizes have been adjusted so that each of these foods provides approximately 100 calories. Notice that for a similar number of calories and grams of fats, the second choices offer less saturated fat and more unsaturated fat. So the first example is butter versus olive oil. And you can see that the total grams of fat are both 11, but the nutrient profile of saturated versus unsaturated fat is better for the olive oil. I won't read each of them, but just to give you those examples. Benefits of omega-3s. Benefits include reduce the risk of heart disease and stroke by lowering blood pressure and decreasing triglycerides, reduces blood clots and is less likely to promote cancer than other fats due to its ability to suppress inflammation. Food sources include canola and flaxseed oils, walnuts, chia seeds and flax seeds, and fatty cold water fish like mackerel, salmon, tuna, sardines, and herring. You want to caution with high-dose supplements. Excess consumption can increase bleeding time and interfere with wound healing, raise LDL cholesterol, and suppress immune function. That being said, people with heart disease may benefit from omega-3 doses greater than what you get from diet alone, but you do want to be cautious and consult your doctor or dietitian first. Health effects of monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. I ask that you pause the presentation momentarily to see if you can answer these questions on your own. Replacing saturated fats with unsaturated fats helps reduce the risk of heart disease. Regular consumption of omega-3 fatty acids suppresses inflammation, which may protect against some cancers. Cutting fat cuts calories and saturated fat. So this image here is also available in your text, and it's just an imagery for you to kind of see that you can have similar products, but also eliminate calories and saturated fat by just making some small swaps. So the first picture at the top left is a pork chop with the fat still on it versus the picture below it, which has the fat trimmed off, which is going to save you 110 calories, 10 grams of fat, 4 grams of saturated fat. In the middle picture, you have a baked potato with 1 tablespoon of butter and 1 tablespoon of sour cream. If you just have the potato plain, you can save about 150 calories, 13 grams of fat, 10 grams are saturated fat. And then the last picture, you have whole milk versus fat-free milk, and the savings are 60 calories, 7 grams of fat, 4 of which those grams are saturated. Fats provide fat-soluble vitamins. Your fat-soluble vitamins include vitamins A, D, E, and K. Fats influence flavor, texture, and palatability, and it increases the desire to eat the food. When it comes to your protein foods, choose lean cuts of meats like poultry or beef. Include seafood and fish products. As for your cooking methods, preference is towards grilling, roasting, baking versus deep frying foods. And you can also look for reduced fat or low fat milk products like milk, yogurt, and cheese. Vegetables, fruits, and grains. You want to consume these without added butters or fat. Lowers consumption of because fruits and vegetables are naturally low in fat, at least most of them are anyway. Fats from avocado and olive benefits. So most of the fat provided by these sources is unsaturated and therefore are good for you. They provide vitamins, fibers, and phytochemicals. Use caution when consuming refined grain products. Think of things like taco shells, biscuits, crackers, and cookies. These may contain trans fats. Solid fats and oils. Limit solid fat consumption, so the fatty parts of meats, fats in whole milk, cheese, butter, fats in fried foods. Choose healthier fats from fish, nuts, and seeds. These provide essential fatty acids, omega-3s, and vitamin E. The Mediterranean diet, there's lots of research on this diet that shows many health benefits. Some traditional features of this diet include they tend to be very low in saturated fat, very low in trans fat, and the diet composition really emphasizes and really focuses on whole foods like vegetables, legumes, and fruits. It limits meat consumption, incorporates monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, as well as complex carbohydrates, fiber, and phytochemicals. It does help lower the risk for heart disease. This is an image of the Mediterranean diet pyramid. You can see at the top, this is what they're consuming the least amounts of, like meats and sweets, as well as cheeses, poultry, yogurt. Incorporates fish and seafood at a little bit more of a moderate amount. And the base of the diet includes lots of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, olive oil, as well as the lifestyle aspect of things, which includes being active, consuming your meals with family, friends, loved ones, and just kind of enjoying time with other people. So that social connection and staying active is also very important to your overall health and diet consumption as well. And this concludes chapter 5.